The Romans gave us roads, they gave us aqueducts and laws. They gave us concrete that still stands today. We know so much about them. We can read their letters, their poems, their grocery lists. We've mapped their cities and excavated their trash heaps. But the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. The Roman world is filled with shadows. There are stories that stop cold, or events that make no sense, or objects that have no purpose. People who vanish without a trace. These aren't just small gaps in the historical record. They are deep, baffling mysteries that historians still argue about today. What really happened to a legion of 5,000 men who marched into the Scottish mist? Why did the Romans make hundreds of strange metal cages that we still can't identify? How did a single volcano on the other side of the planet help bring down their republic? These are the stories that keep the past alive. They remind us that for all our science and all our research, history is still full of ghosts. Number 19. Could a single volcano cause a republic's fall? The year is 44 BC. Julius Caesar lies dead on the floor of the Senate. The world holds its breath. What follows is not a smooth transition of power. It's a bloodbath. A chaotic power vacuum that pits Caesar's heir, Octavian, against his right-hand man, Mark Antony. The Roman Republic tears itself apart in a brutal civil war. Historians have always pointed to the political assassination as the trigger. But what if the real push came from 5,000 miles away, from a volcano in modern-day Alaska? For years, ancient writers spoke of the time after Caesar's death as a period of unnatural cold. The sun was dim, the sky was dark. Plutarch wrote that the sun's orb was pale and without radiance. Appian described frosts in summer and failed crops. For centuries, these were seen as poetic metaphors for a dark political time. But new evidence suggests they were describing a literal reality. The key to this mystery lies in ice. The researchers, led by archaeologist Joseph R. McConnell of the Desert Research Institute, drilled deep into the Greenland ice sheet. Ice cores are like tree rings for the atmosphere. Each layer traps particles from the air for that year. In a 2020 study published in the prestigious journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they found a layer of volcanic ash, or tephra, sandwiched in the ice. This layer dated precisely to early 43 BC. It was one of the largest volcanic fallout events of the last 2,500 years. The chemical fingerprint of this ash was a perfect match for one specific volcano, Okmok, in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. The Okmok eruption was colossal. It would have blasted a massive plume of sulfur and ash into the stratosphere. These particles would have spread across the entire northern hemisphere, creating a veil that blocked sunlight. The result was a volcanic winter. Climate models based on the eruption data show that temperatures in southern Europe and North Africa would have plummeted. They estimate a drop of several degrees Celsius, a catastrophic change for an agricultural society. The Mediterranean, the breadbasket of Rome, experienced 2 years of extreme cold. This wasn't just a chilly summer, it meant widespread crop failures, it meant famine. It meant desperation and social unrest. This climate shock hit at the worst possible moment. The Second Triumvirate, formed by Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus, was trying to consolidate power. They needed to feed the city of Rome and pay their massive armies, but the grain shipments from Egypt and Sicily failed. The famine they faced wasn't just bad luck or poor management, it was a direct consequence of a volcanic eruption on the other side of the world. This environmental disaster would have fueled the chaos. Hungry people are angry people. Starving soldiers are unreliable soldiers. The political crisis was inseparable from the environmental one. The failure of the harvests likely made the proscriptions, the state-sanctioned murders of political enemies to seize their wealth, even more brutal and necessary for the new rulers. They were desperate for money and resources. The fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire under Augustus Octavian was one of the most pivotal moments in Western history. We have always viewed it through a purely human lens of ambition, betrayal, and war. But the ice cores from Greenland tell a different story. They show that massive impersonal forces of nature can be a hidden actor on the historical stage. The assassination of Caesar lit the fuse, but the Okmok eruption may have been the barrel of gunpowder. It pushed a society already on the brink right over the edge. So what do we still not know? How much did the Romans themselves understand? Did they connect the weird weather to the political turmoil? Or did they just see it as the gods showing their anger? How many other major historical turning points were influenced by volcanic eruptions or other climate events we haven't discovered yet? If a single volcano could help topple a superpower, what does that say about the fragility of our own global civilization? And could the Republic have survived the political crisis if the harvests had not failed? Or number 18, what was the source of the Antonine Plague? In 165 AD, Roman soldiers returned from a campaign in the Near East, fighting the Parthian Empire. They brought back more than the spoils of war. They brought back a disease that would ravage the Roman world for 15 years. It became known as the Antonine Plague, named after the ruling emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. This wasn't just a minor outbreak, it was a pandemic on a scale the empire had never seen. The symptoms described by the famous physician Galen were horrific. Fever, chills, diarrhea, which was often black, and a terrible skin rash of pustules that would scab over and fall off. It sounds a lot like smallpox, or maybe a particularly virulent strain of measles. Historians and scientists still debate the exact pathogen. Whatever it was, the effect was catastrophic. At its peak, the plague was killing 2,000 people a day in the city of Rome. The Roman historian Cassius Dio, who was an eyewitness, reported this number. The total death toll is estimated to be around 5 million people, but some historians, like Kyle Harper in his book, The Fate of Rome, suggest the numbers could have been far higher, perhaps wiping out as much as a quarter or a third of the population in some areas. Imagine 1 in every 4 people, dying. The plague swept through Italy, Gaul, the Germanic provinces, and into Egypt. It didn't care if you were a senator or a slave. It even claimed the life of an emperor, Lucius Verus, who co-ruled with Marcus Aurelius. The plague ripped the heart out of the Roman army. Legions were hollowed out. Recruitment became a nightmare. The government was forced to conscript slaves, gladiators, and even bandits to fill the ranks. This military weakness on the northern frontiers allowed Germanic tribes, like the Marcomanni and Quadi, to pour across the Danube River, leading to a series of long and bloody wars. And Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, would spend most of the rest of his reign on the battlefield, desperately trying to hold the borders. The economic impact was just as devastating. With a depleted population, there were not enough farmers to work the fields. There were not enough craftsmen in the cities. Tax revenues plummeted. The government resorted to devaluing the currency, melting down silver statues to mint more coins with less precious metal in them. This sparked inflation that would plague the empire for decades. The social fabric was torn apart. People fled the cities, abandoning their homes and their sick relatives. The sheer number of dead bodies was overwhelming. In his Meditations, Marcus Aurelius writes about the fleeting nature of life, a theme that must have felt incredibly immediate and real as he watched his world die around him. Some scholars believe the plague created a spiritual crisis. The old gods seemed powerless to stop the suffering. This may have created an opening for new religions that offered comfort and a sense of community, like Christianity. The plague didn't cause the fall of Rome, but it was a body blow from which the empire never fully recovered. It marked the end of the Pax Romana, a long period of relative peace and stability, and the beginning of a much darker, more chaotic era. But the central mystery remains, what was it? Without DNA evidence from a plague victim, we can only guess based on Galen's descriptions. Was it smallpox, which would have been new and terrifying to a population with no immunity? Or was it measles? Both are highly contagious and deadly. Another theory is that it was not one disease, but a perfect storm of several pathogens hitting at once. The Roman Empire, with its vast trade networks and dense cities, was the perfect incubator for a pandemic. A virus that emerged in a remote corner of Asia could travel along the Silk Road, jump to Roman legions in Mesopotamia, and be in the city of Rome within months. What pathogen, or combination of pathogens, was capable of causing such devastation? If we found a plague pit from this era, could modern science finally identify the killer? How did the Roman medical system, the most advanced in the world at the time, completely fail to understand or combat the disease? And how much did this biological catastrophe, rather than political or military failures, set the stage for the eventual decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire? Number 17, who were the real barbarians at the gate? The story we all know is simple. The Roman Empire was a beacon of civilization. It was brought down by waves of savage, uncivilized barbarians who swept in from the forests of Germany and the steppes of Asia. The Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, they were the barbarians at the gate. It's a powerful image. Civilized versus savage, order versus chaos. But the more archaeologists and historians look at the evidence, the more complicated and blurry that picture becomes. The idea of a clear line between Roman and barbarian might be a myth. For centuries, Romans and Germanic tribes lived side by side along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. It wasn't a constant state of war. There was massive amounts of trade. Roman coins, glassware, and pottery are found deep inside what was then barbarian territory. German amber furs and slaves were highly prized in Rome. There was also a huge amount of cultural exchange. Barbarians served in the Roman army. In fact, by the late Empire, a huge portion of the army, including many of its highest-ranking generals, were of Germanic origin. Men like Stilicho, a Vandal who became the supreme commander of the Western Roman armies, were thoroughly Romanized. They spoke Latin, they adopted Roman customs, and they were fiercely loyal to the empire. They were barbarians by blood, but Roman in every other way. The process worked in the other direction too. Roman styles and technologies were adopted by people outside the empire. Archaeological digs at sites like the one in Weister in the Netherlands, a Germanic village, show a society that was becoming more Roman over time. They adopted Roman-style buildings and used Roman tools. As historian Peter Heather argues in his book, The Fall of the Roman Empire, A New History of Rome and the Barbarians, the long-term contact with Rome actually transformed barbarian societies. It made them more politically organized, more militarily sophisticated, and more economically powerful. In a way, Rome created its own worst enemies. So when we talk about the invasions of the 4th and 5th centuries, it wasn't always a simple case of an outside force attacking. Often, it was more like a civil war. Many of the so-called barbarian groups who entered the empire were not trying to destroy it. They were trying to find a place within it. The Visigoths, for example, who famously sacked Rome in 410 AD, were originally refugees. They had been driven from their lands by the Huns and had been allowed to settle inside the empire's borders. They were treated horribly by corrupt Roman officials, which led them to rebel. Their goal wasn't to burn Roman civilization to the ground. Their goal was to get better terms, to be treated as partners or foederati allies within the Roman system. The very concept of a single Gothic or Vandal people is also being questioned. Historian Walter Goffert suggests that these large tribal confederations were not ancient peoples who had existed for centuries. Instead, they were often fluid, multi-ethnic, political, and military groups that formed in response to Roman pressure. They were armies on the move, picking up new followers as they went. The identity was not based on blood, but on loyalty to a successful warlord. The man who led the sack of Rome in 410, Alaric, had spent years serving in the Roman army. He knew Roman tactics and Roman politics inside and out. Was he a barbarian king or a disgruntled Roman general? The line is very hard to draw. This new understanding doesn't mean the end of the Western Roman Empire was a peaceful process. It was incredibly violent and destructive, but it forces us to rethink the simple narrative. The fall of Rome wasn't a football game with two clearly defined teams. It was a messy, complicated disintegration where identities were fluid, loyalties were constantly shifting, and the barbarians were often already inside the gates, and in many cases were indistinguishable from the Romans themselves. So, who were the people who dismantled the Western Empire? Were they foreign invaders, or were they a product of the Roman system itself? How much of our modern idea of us versus them is shaped by this old, simplistic story of Romans and barbarians? If the generals defending Rome and the generals attacking it were sometimes from the same Germanic tribes, what does that really mean for the concept of an invasion? Was the fall of Rome less of an external conquest and more of an internal collapse, where the very definition of what it meant to be Roman had ceased to matter? Number 16. What was the Sator Square palindrome really for? Across the ruins of the Roman Empire, from a wall in Pompeii preserved by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD to a fort in Britain, a strange puzzle has been found. It's a square of 5 words: Sator, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. It's a perfect palindrome. You can read it from left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or bottom to top. It always says the same thing. The Latin is a bit strange. Sator means sower or planter. And tenet means he holds. Opera means works or cares. Rotas means wheels. The word eripo is the real mystery. It doesn't appear anywhere else in Latin literature. It might be a proper name. A rough translation could be the sower aripo holds the wheels with care. It's a cryptic, almost nonsensical phrase. So what was it for? This is a question that has baffled scholars for centuries. The square has been found carved into stone, scribbled on walls as graffiti, and included in ancient texts. It's found in Roman military outposts, in private homes, and in Christian churches from a later period. Its widespread use suggests it was important. But why? One of the most popular theories is that it was an early Christian symbol, a secret code used during times of persecution. If you rearrange the letters of Sator Aripo Tenet Operotas, you can form a cross shape with the words Pater Noster, Our Father, the first two words of the Lord's Prayer in Latin twice. The remaining letters are two A's and two O's. These can be interpreted as Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, a common symbol for Christ. The central N of Tenet forms the center of the cross. This anagram is incredibly clever. It seems too perfect to be a coincidence. If this theory is true, the square was a secret way for Christians to identify each other, a hidden cross and prayer that would be meaningless to a pagan Roman official. The discovery of the square in Pompeii is crucial here. If it was there before 79 AD, it would be one of the earliest pieces of evidence for Christianity anywhere in the Roman Empire, possibly even before some of the Gospels were written down. But there are problems with the Christian theory. Some scholars, like historian Duncan Fishwick, argue that while the anagram is clever, there's no direct proof that early Christians used such complex word games. The square has also been found in contexts that don't seem to be Christian at all. For example, a version was found in the temple of the imperial cult in the Roman city of Aquincum in modern-day Hungary. Why would a Christian secret sign be in a pagan temple? This has led to other theories. Maybe it was a magical charm. The palindrome's perfect symmetry could have been seen as having protective powers. People might have carved it on their homes to ward off evil spirits, fire, or sickness. It was a piece of word magic. Another possibility is that it was connected to Mithraism, a popular Roman mystery cult, or to Jewish mysticism. Some have suggested that Eripo is a Hebraic or Aramaic word, or perhaps it's something simpler. Maybe it was just a clever word puzzle, a brain teaser that became popular and spread throughout the empire like a modern Sudoku or crossword puzzle. The Roman equivalent of a viral meme. The problem with this idea is that it doesn't explain the almost religious reverence with which the square was treated in later centuries, where it was often used in magical texts and folk remedies. We are left with a perfect puzzle, an object that is both simple and incredibly complex. It's a 5-word square that seems to hold a secret, but refuses to give it up. Its meaning was so well understood by the people who used it that they never felt the need to write it down. And so it was lost. We have the lock, but we've lost the key. Was the Sator Square a secret Christian creed, a magical pagan charm, or just a clever game? Why does the word Aripo appear nowhere else in all of Roman literature? If it was a Christian symbol, does its presence in Pompeii force us to rewrite the timeline of early Christianity? And is it possible that it meant different things to different people in different parts of the empire, a symbol that was adopted and reinterpreted over hundreds of years? Number 15. Why did they abandon their cities in Britain so suddenly? For nearly 400 years, from 43 AD to around 410 AD, Britain was a Roman province. The Romans built cities with stone forums, basilicas, bathhouses, and amphitheaters. They built villas with intricate mosaics and underfloor heating. They built a network of paved roads that we still use the routes of today. Places like Londinium, London, Eboracum, York, and Aquae Sulis, Bath, were bustling urban centers. Roman life, for the wealthy at least, was established, and then it just stopped. Within a generation or two, the cities were empty. The villas were falling into ruin. The economy collapsed. It's one of the most dramatic societal collapses in history. The traditional date given for the end of Roman Britain is 410 AD. This is the year the Western Roman Emperor Honorius supposedly sent a letter known as the Rescript of Honorius to the cities of Britain. The province was under attack from Picts, Scots, and Saxons. The Britons had appealed to Rome for military help. But the empire itself was crumbling. Rome had just been, sacked by the Goths. The emperor's reply was simple. You're on your own. Look to your own defenses. After that, the historical record goes dark for almost 200 years. The lights went out all over Roman Britain. The archaeology tells a stark story of this collapse. By the early 5th century, new construction in stone ceases. The use of coins grinds to a halt. The mass-produced pottery industry disappears. People stop using Roman-style buildings. In cities like Wroxeter Viroconium Corniviorum, once the 4th largest city in Roman Britain, archaeologists like Graham Webster have shown that people moved out of the stone buildings and started putting up simple timber structures in the old marketplace. Life continued, but it was a shadow of what it had been. The complex, interconnected urban Roman economy was replaced by a localized subsistence farming existence. It was a massive technological and social step backwards. So why did it happen so fast? The withdrawal of the Roman legions is part of the story, but it's not the whole story. The army wasn't just a fighting force, it was the engine of the economy. The soldiers were paid in cash, and they spent that cash driving demand for everything from food to pottery to leather goods. When the army left, that cash disappeared. The entire economic system that supported the cities and villas seized up. But it still doesn't explain the total abandonment of the urban way of life. People in other parts of the empire, like Gaul, continued to live in cities after Roman rule ended. Why was Britain different? One theory, proposed by archaeologists like Brian Ward Perkins in his book, The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization, is that the Roman economy in Britain was a house of cards. It was highly specialized. One region produced pottery, another mined lead. This all depended on a safe, efficient transportation network and a cash-based economy. When the system broke down, people couldn't get the things they needed. Life in the cities became impossible. They had to retreat to the countryside and learn to be self-sufficient again. The skills of the Roman world, like masonry and mosaic setting, became useless. The skills of the Iron Age, like subsistence farming and basic weaving, became essential for survival. Another factor could be a crisis of identity. For the wealthy Romano-British elite, their entire identity was tied to Rome. They spoke Latin, they wore togas, they lived in villas. When the connection to Rome was severed, their world fell apart. There may have been internal conflicts, with local warlords carving out their own petty kingdoms. The arrival of Anglo-Saxon migrants from Germany and Denmark was another major factor, though the debate rages on whether this was a violent invasion that wiped out the native Britons or a more gradual process of migration and cultural assimilation. The speed and totality of the collapse are what baffle historians. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a cliff edge. A complex, literate, urban society reverted to a pre-literate, non-urban one in a few decades. The great stone buildings were left to crumble, their purpose and the society that built them completely forgotten. When the monk Augustine arrived in 597 AD to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity, he famously described their pagan temples as the work of giants. The people of England had forgotten that their own ancestors had built the Roman ruins that dotted the landscape. Did the Romano-British population simply get wiped out by plague or invasion? Or did they just melt away into the countryside, forgetting how to be Roman? How could the knowledge of how to build and maintain cities be lost so completely, so quickly? Was the collapse a result of a perfect storm of economic failure, political chaos, and external migration, or was there one key factor that pushed it over the edge? And what was life really like in those dark, silent years after the last Romans left? Number 14. How did Roman concrete last so long? They go to Rome, look at the Pantheon. It was built around 126 AD. It's still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. It has stood for almost 2,000 years through earthquakes, floods, and wars. Now, look at a modern concrete bridge or overpass. It will likely start to show signs of decay within 50 years. How did the Romans make concrete that was so much more durable than our own? It's a question that has fascinated engineers and scientists for decades. They created a material that we are only just beginning to understand. The basic recipe for Roman concrete was a mix of a binder like lime, an aggregate like stones or sand, and water. The secret ingredient seems to have been volcanic ash, specifically a type called pozzolana, which they found in abundance near Mount Vesuvius. The Romans knew that mixing this ash with lime created a mortar that was incredibly strong and crucially could set underwater. This allowed them to build massive structures like harbors, bridges, and aqueducts that have endured for millennia. The breakwaters at the port of Caesarea in modern-day Israel, built by Herod the Great using Roman techniques, are still largely intact despite being battered by Mediterranean waves for 2,000 years. For a long time, scientists believed the key was the pozzolanic ash. The chemical reaction between the ash, lime, and seawater creates a very stable mineral called tobermorit. This mineral actually grows and interlocks over time, making the concrete stronger as it ages, the exact opposite of modern concrete. It's a self-healing material, but a recent study from a team of researchers at MIT, Harvard, and laboratories in Italy and Switzerland, published in 2023, has revealed another piece of the puzzle. The team, led by MIT professor Admir Mazik, focused on something that had always been seen as a flaw in Roman concrete: small, white chunks of lime, called lime clasts, that are found throughout the material. The old assumption was that these were a sign of poor mixing, but Mazik and his team had a different idea. What if they were there on purpose? They analyzed samples of concrete from an ancient Roman wall at the site of Privinum in Italy. They discovered that these lime clasts were not made from standard quicklime, but were likely formed at very high temperatures in a process they call hot mixing. Here's the new theory. When a tiny crack forms in the Roman concrete, water seeps in. This water reacts with the lime clast, creating a calcium-rich solution that quickly recrystallizes as calcium carbonate, effectively filling the crack and healing the concrete before the crack can spread. The lime clasts act as a built-in repair mechanism. This explains the incredible longevity of the structures. They weren't just strong, they could fix themselves. This was a revolutionary discovery, overturning decades of assumptions. The Romans were not just brilliant engineers, they were brilliant chemists who had designed a smart material. This technology was not a secret held by a few masters. It was widespread. The Romans used concrete for everything, from the foundations of the Colosseum to the domes of bathhouses to the lining of aqueducts. It was a cheap, versatile, and incredibly effective building material that allowed them to build bigger, faster, and more creatively than any civilization before them. It literally shaped their world. And then, with the fall of the Western Empire, the recipe was lost. For over 1,000 years during the Middle Ages, no one could build structures on the scale of the Romans. The knowledge simply vanished. But huge questions remain. How did the Romans discover this hot mixing technique? Was it a result of careful experimentation or a lucky accident? The Roman engineer Vitruvius wrote a famous treatise, De Architectura, which describes concrete making, but he doesn't mention this specific process. Was it a trade secret passed down from master to apprentice? Did they fully understand the chemistry of what they were doing, or did they just know that this particular method worked? And with this new understanding, can we finally replicate Roman concrete to create more sustainable, self-healing buildings for our own time? And number 13, why was the Etruscan language a dead end? Before Rome was an empire, or even a republic, it was just a small city on the Tiber River. The dominant power in Italy was a mysterious and sophisticated people called the Etruscans. They flourished in the region of modern-day Tuscany from about the 8th century BC to the 1st century BC. They were master craftsmen in bronze and gold. They were skilled seafarers. They had a rich religion and built magnificent painted tombs. The early Romans borrowed heavily from the Etruscans. They adopted their alphabet, their architectural styles, and even some of their religious rituals, like the practice of reading the future by examining the livers of sacrificed animals. The last 3 kings of Rome before the Republic was founded were Etruscan. And yet, we know remarkably little about them. The main reason is their language. The Etruscan language is a ghost. It's an isolate, which means it has no known relatives. It's not related to Latin or any other Italic language. It's not related to Greek. It's not part of the Indo-European family of languages that almost all modern European languages belong to. It seems to have appeared in Italy out of nowhere. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus claimed the Etruscans were migrants from Lydia in modern-day Turkey. Another historian, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, argued that they were native to Italy. The linguistic evidence doesn't clearly support either theory. The strange thing is, we can read Etruscan. We have about 13,000 short inscriptions. They are written in an alphabet adapted from Greek, so we know what the letters sound like. The problem is we don't know what most of the words mean. Imagine finding a library of books written in English, but you only know the definitions of words like and, the, is, and a few dozen nouns. You could sound out the sentences, but you wouldn't understand the story. That's the situation with Etruscan. Most of the inscriptions we have are very repetitive. They are mainly funerary inscriptions found on tombs, which basically say the name of the deceased, their parents' names, and how old they were when they died. So we have a decent vocabulary for family relationships and numbers, but not much else. The longest single Etruscan text is the Liber Linteus Zagrebiensis, or the Linen Book of Zagreb. It's an incredible artifact. It's a book written on linen bandages that were later used to wrap an Egyptian mummy. The mummy was bought in Egypt in the 19th century and taken to a museum in Zagreb, Croatia. It was only later that someone noticed the strange writing on the wrappings. The text is about 1,200 words long and seems to be a ritual calendar detailing what ceremonies to perform on what days. Scholars have been able to pick out the names of gods and dates, but the meaning of the ritual instructions remains obscure. We have the instruction manual for a machine we've never seen. The language seems to have died out completely by the 1st century AD. As Rome's power grew, Latin became the dominant language of Italy. The Etruscans gradually assimilated. They started speaking Latin, and within a few generations, their own language was forgotten. No Etruscan literature survives. If they had historians, poets, or playwrights, all of their works are lost. The Roman writer Livy mentions that there were Etruscan historical books, but none have ever been found. It's as if an entire intellectual world was erased. The mystery of the Etruscan language is profound. Where did it come from? Its unique non-Indo-European nature has led to some fringe theories connecting it to Basque or languages of the Caucasus, but there is no solid evidence. It stands alone, a linguistic island in ancient Europe. The slow, painstaking work of linguists like Rex Wallace and L.R. Palmer has given us a glimpse into its structure, but we are still a long way from being able to read and understand a complex text. Without a Rosetta Stone, a longer bilingual text in Etruscan, and a known language like Latin, we may never be able to fully resurrect it. So what secrets are locked away in the Etruscan language? Did they have a rich literature that could tell us their history from their own perspective, not from the biased viewpoint of their Roman conquerors? Where did this strange language come from, and why did it have no relatives in ancient Europe? Is there a lost bilingual inscription buried somewhere in the Italian soil that could finally unlock the mystery? Or will the voice of the Etruscans remain forever silent? Number 12. What was the purpose of the Antikythera mechanism? In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers was forced to take shelter from a storm near the small island of Antikythera. When the storm passed, they decided to dive in the area. One of the divers, Elias Stadiatos, surfaced and babbled about seeing a shipwreck full of naked bodies. The bodies turned out to be bronze and marble statues. They had discovered an ancient Roman shipwreck dating to around 60 to 70 BC. Over the next 2 years, a difficult and dangerous recovery effort brought up a treasure trove of artifacts. Among the beautiful statues and pottery was a lump of corroded bronze and wood. It was thought to be a rock at first and was ignored for months. When a museum archaeologist named Valerio Stais finally examined the lump, he noticed it had a gear wheel embedded in it. As the lump dried, it cracked open, revealing more gears, plates, and inscriptions. It was some kind of complex machine, nothing like it had ever been found from the ancient world. Like, it was so advanced that for decades, many scholars thought it had to be a modern object that had somehow gotten mixed up with the ancient artifacts. The idea that the ancient Greeks or Romans could build something with such precision gearing seemed impossible. It was a machine that shouldn't exist. It took over a century of painstaking research using advanced X-ray and CT scanning technology to begin to understand the device, now known as the Antikythera mechanism. A major research project, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, involving scientists from Greece, the UK, and the US, has been able to digitally reconstruct the machine and read many of its hidden inscriptions. What they found is breathtaking. The Antikythera mechanism was not a clock or a navigation tool, as some early theories suggested. It was an astronomical computer. It was a mechanical model of the cosmos. The device was housed in a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. On the front was a large dial that showed the position of the sun and the moon in the zodiac. It also had a second nested dial that showed the Greek calendar. On the back were two large spiral dials. One was a Saros dial, used to predict both solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. It showed when an eclipse would happen, what type it would be, and even what time of day. The other dial was a Metonic dial, which showed a 19-year cycle that reconciled the solar year and the lunar months. This was used to regulate the calendar. It even had a smaller dial for timing important events like the Olympic Games. You would turn a knob on the side, and the whole system of over 30 interlocking bronze gears would move, modeling the complex motions of the heavens. The level of scientific and engineering genius is staggering. To build this, the creator had to understand complex astronomical cycles. They had to be able to calculate the prime numbers needed for the gear ratios. They had to have the metalworking skills to cut tiny, precise gear teeth on bronze wheels. The gears even had a differential, a set of gears that allows for the addition and subtraction of angular velocities. This was a technology that was not thought to have been invented until the 14th century in Europe. The Antikythera mechanism rewrites the history of technology. It shows a level of mechanical sophistication that was not seen again for over 1,000 years. The big mystery is, why is this the only one we have? The craftsmanship suggests it wasn't a one-off prototype. It was likely the product of a long tradition of mechanical engineering. The Roman writer Cicero in the 1st century BC mentions two such devices built by Archimedes in the 3rd century BC. He describes them as mechanical spheres that modeled the motions of the sun, moon, and the 5 known planets. The Antikythera mechanism might be a descendant of this Archimedean tradition. But if such devices existed, where are they? Why have we found no other examples or even fragments of them? Why are there no detailed texts describing how to build them? Who built this incredible machine, and for what purpose? Was it a teaching tool for astronomy students? A prestige object for a wealthy patron? Or something else entirely? Why did this incredible technological tradition completely disappear? Did the knowledge get lost, or was it actively suppressed? And what other marvels of ancient engineering are still lying at the bottom of the sea, waiting to once again change our understanding of the past? Well, number 11. Why did Mithraism vanish so completely? For about 3 centuries, from the 1st to the 4th AD, a mysterious religion spread throughout the Roman Empire. It was called Mithraism. It was especially popular with soldiers, merchants, and imperial officials. It was a religion for men only. Its temples, called Mithraea, have been found from the cold frontiers of Britain to the deserts of Syria. They were small, dark, underground chambers, often designed to look like a cave. At the center of every Mithraeum was a dramatic image, the Tauroctony. It showed the god Mithras in a Phrygian cap and flowing cloak, slaying a sacred bull. He is often surrounded by other figures, a dog, a snake, a scorpion, a raven, and 2 torchbearers named Cautus and Cautopates. This central image was clearly the key to the entire religion, but we don't know what it means. The problem with studying Mithraism is that it was a mystery religion. Its teachings were secret, revealed only to initiates through a series of 7 grades or levels of initiation. They had no public scriptures, they left no gospels or theological texts explaining their beliefs. Everything we know about them comes from 2 sources, the archaeology of their temples and the writings of their enemies, mostly Christian authors who condemn them as a demonic counterfeit of their own faith. This means we have a lot of physical evidence, but almost no explanation for what it means. We have the stage set, but we've lost the script. Scholars have been arguing about the meaning of the bull-slaying scene for over a century. The great Belgian historian Frans Cumont, in the early 20th century, proposed that Mithras was an ancient Persian Iranian god, and the religion was essentially a Romanized form of Zoroastrianism. But more recent scholars like Manfred Kloss have challenged this. They point out that there's very little evidence for this bull-slaying myth in ancient Persian texts. They argue that Mithraism was a new creation born inside the Roman Empire that used Persian-sounding names and imagery to give itself an air of ancient exotic wisdom. A more recent and compelling theory, developed by the scholar David Ulansey, connects the Tauroctony to astronomy. Ulansey argues that the entire scene is a star map. Mithras represents the constellation Perseus, and the bull is the constellation Taurus. The other animals surrounding them also correspond to constellations Canis Minor the dog, Hydra the snake, Scorpio the scorpion, and Corvus the raven. Ulanzi suggests that the scene depicts a specific astronomical event, the end of the age of Taurus and the beginning of the age of Aries, caused by the precession of the equinoxes. This astronomical phenomenon, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, was discovered by the Greek astronomer Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC. According to this theory, Mithras is a powerful new god with the ability to move the entire cosmos. This would explain the religion's appeal. It offered secret knowledge of the universe. Whatever its secrets, Mithraism was a major rival to early Christianity. The two religions had some superficial similarities. Both had a savior figure, baptismal rites, and a communal meal of bread and wine. Both promised salvation and a better life after death. For a time, it was not at all clear which one would become the dominant religion of the empire. Then, in the late 4th century, Mithraism just disappears. After Christianity became the official state religion under Emperor Theodosius in 391 AD, pagan temples were closed or destroyed. The last dated Mithraic inscription is from around this time. The religion seems to have been wiped out with shocking speed and thoroughness. The mystery is why it vanished so completely. Other pagan traditions survived for centuries, often blending with Christian folk beliefs. But Mithraism seems to have been uprooted entirely. Was it because its followers were heavily concentrated in the army and the state bureaucracy, institutions that were quickly Christianized from the top down? Was it because the secrecy and exclusivity of the cult made it vulnerable? A religion with no public face is easy to erase. Or did its followers simply convert to Christianity, finding that the new state religion offered a more direct path to power and social acceptance? We have no accounts of the last Mithraists. We don't know if they fought for their faith, went into hiding, or just gave up. They simply fell silent. What was the central secret of the Mithraic mysteries? Was the bull slaying an astronomical code, a story of creation, or something else entirely? Why was it so popular with Roman soldiers? And why did this powerful and widespread religion, a major competitor to Christianity, collapse so quickly and utterly that it left almost no trace in the cultures that followed? Was number 10, who poisoned Germanicus? In the year 19 AD, the golden boy of the Roman imperial family died in Antioch. His name was Germanicus Julius Caesar. He was the nephew and adopted son of the Emperor Tiberius. He was handsome, popular, and a brilliant military commander who had won major victories in Germany. The Roman people adored him. He was seen as the heir to the legacy of Augustus and the future of Rome. His sudden death, at the age of just 33, sent shockwaves through the empire, and from the very beginning there were whispers of foul play. The official cause of death was illness, but Germanicus himself on his deathbed was convinced he had been poisoned. And he named the man he thought was responsible, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, the governor of Syria. The story, as told by the Roman historian Tacitus in his Annals, is a gripping political thriller. Tiberius, an old and gloomy emperor, was said to be intensely jealous of Germanicus's popularity. He appointed Piso, a man known for his arrogance and insubordination, as governor of Syria with the specific task of undermining Germanicus, who had been sent to the eastern provinces on a special command. The two men clashed immediately. Piso openly defied Germanicus's orders. According to Tacitus, the signs of black magic were found in Germanicus's quarters. Curses and spells, human remains dug up from graves, and tablets with Germanicus's name inscribed on them were discovered hidden in the walls and under the floors. This was ancient Roman witchcraft, intended to cause his death. When Germanicus fell ill, his suspicions fell on Piso and his wife, Plancina. After his death, his body was publicly displayed in the Forum of Antioch. Tacitus reports that there were signs of poison, though he remains ambiguous about the proof. Germanicus's grieving widow, Agrippina the Elder, brought his ashes back to Rome. The public outpouring of grief was immense. The people were furious and demanded justice. Piso was put on trial in the Senate. The charge was not just murder, but treason. He was accused of trying to start a civil war by retaking control of Syria with his legions after Germanicus's death. The trial was a public sensation. But before a verdict could be reached, Piso was found dead in his home. The official verdict was suicide, but many, including Tacitus, hint that he may have been murdered on Tiberius's orders to prevent him from revealing embarrassing truths about the emperor's involvement. This is the story we have. But is it true? Tacitus is a brilliant writer, but he is not an unbiased historian. He was a member of the senatorial class that despised Tiberius. His Annals are a masterpiece of insinuation and character assassination. He never explicitly says Tiberius ordered the murder, but he masterfully plants the suspicion in the reader's mind. The evidence for the poisoning itself is weak. The signs on the body could have been the natural results of a serious illness and rapid decomposition in a hot climate. The witchcraft evidence, while creepy, is not proof of murder. Many ancient Romans believed in curses, but that doesn't mean they worked. Germanicus could have died from a disease like cholera or typhoid, which were common in the region. In 1995, a remarkable archaeological discovery shed new light on the case. A series of bronze tablets were found in Spain, inscribed with the official Senate decree from Piso's trial. This document, the Senatus Consultum de Sienne Pizone Petre, gives a more official, less sensational version of events. It confirms the political conflict and Piso's treasonous actions after Germanicus' death. It finds him guilty of that, but it explicitly acquits him of the murder charge, stating there was no evidence of poisoning. This official document directly contradicts the more dramatic story told by Tacitus. It suggests that the poisoning story might have been a rumor, amplified by a grieving Agrippina and a hostile public, and later immortalized by a biased historian. So we are left with a cold case that is 2,000 years old. Did the Emperor Tiberius, consumed by jealousy, order the assassination of his own adopted son and heir? Was Piso a loyal servant carrying out a dark order, or was he a rogue agent who acted on his own? Or was the whole thing a tragic misunderstanding, the death of a beloved hero from natural causes that was spun into a conspiracy theory by political enemies and a suspicious public? Was Germanicus really poisoned, or did he die of a disease that Roman medicine couldn't identify? Was Tacitus reporting the truth, or was he writing brilliant political propaganda? Does the official Senate decree exonerating Piso tell the real story, or was it a cover-up ordered by the emperor? And will we ever know the truth about the death that shattered the dream of a new Augustan age? Number 9. What really happened to Emperor Valens at Adrianople? On August 9th, 378 AD, a Roman army stood on a dusty plain in Thrace, near the city of Adrianople, modern Edirne in Turkey. They were led by the Eastern Roman Emperor himself, a man named Valens. They were facing a massive force of Gothic warriors. The battle that followed was one of the worst military disasters in Roman history, a slaughter that has been compared to the Battle of Cannae. 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army, perhaps as many as 20,000 men, were wiped out. Many of the highest-ranking generals were killed, and somewhere in the carnage the Emperor Valens vanished. His body was never found. The background to the battle was a refugee crisis. 2 years earlier, in 376, a large group of Goths, fleeing the advance of the terrifying Huns from the east, had appeared on the banks of the Danube River, the empire's northern border. They begged the Romans for permission to cross and settle in Roman territory as allies. Valens agreed, but the situation was horribly mismanaged by corrupt and incompetent Roman officials. They stole the Goths' food, took their children as slaves, and treated them with contempt. Starving and humiliated, the Goths rebelled. For 2 years, they plundered the Balkan provinces. Valens, who had been fighting a war with Persia, marched west with his field army to deal with the problem once and for all. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, our main source for the battle, was a former soldier and provides a vivid, terrifying account. Valens was overconfident. He had received word that his nephew, the Western Emperor Gratian, was marching to his aid with reinforcements. But Valens was jealous of his young nephew's military successes and eager to win a glorious victory on his own. He was also given bad intelligence that suggested the Gothic force was much smaller than it actually was. He ordered his army to attack even though his men were tired and thirsty from a long march under the hot summer sun. The battle started well for the Romans, but as they were engaged with the main Gothic camp, a huge force of Gothic cavalry, which had been away foraging, suddenly appeared and smashed into the Roman left flank. The Roman cavalry was scattered, the infantry was surrounded. What followed was a massacre. The Roman legions were packed so tightly together that they couldn't even raise their arms to use their weapons. They were cut down where they stood. Ammianus writes, "The ground, covered with streams of blood, was hidden by the heaps of the slain." In the middle of this chaos, Emperor Valens disappeared. Ammianus gives 2 possible accounts of his death. One story says he was struck by an arrow and died on the field, his body lost among the thousands of other corpses, impossible to identify because he was not wearing his imperial insignia. The other story is more specific and grim. It says that Valens, wounded, was carried by his bodyguards to a nearby farmhouse. The Goths, not knowing the emperor was inside, surrounded the farmhouse and, unable to break down the door, set it on fire. The Emperor of the East was burned alive. This second story became the more popular one. The Battle of Adrianople was a turning point. It wasn't the first time a Roman emperor had died in battle, but it was the first time an army had been so utterly annihilated within the empire's own borders. It shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. It showed that the barbarians were not just a nuisance on the frontier, they were a force capable of destroying a Roman field army and killing its emperor. The new emperor, Theodosius, was forced to sign a treaty with the Goths, allowing them to settle inside the empire as an autonomous nation. This set a dangerous precedent, creating a state within a state and accelerating the process of the barbarization of the army. But the central mystery remains. What really happened to Valens? His body was never recovered. There was no state funeral. This lack of a body created uncertainty. If he was burned in the farmhouse, who survived to tell the tale? If he died on the field, why couldn't his own soldiers find the body of their emperor after the battle? The Goths would have had no reason to hide the body, proving they had killed the emperor. Would have been a huge propaganda victory. The disappearance of a Roman emperor was a deeply unsettling event. It was as if the symbol of Roman power and order had simply been erased from the earth. Was Valens killed by a random arrow in the chaos of battle, or was he burned alive in a peasant's hut, an ignominious end for the ruler of half the Roman world? Is it possible neither of these stories is true, and he suffered some other unknown fate? Could he have been captured and executed, or did he simply flee, only to be murdered by his own routing soldiers? The fact that his body was never found has left a permanent question mark at the heart of one of Rome's darkest days. Number 8. Why did the oracle at Delphi fall silent? For 1,000 years, the most powerful and respected religious site in the ancient world was the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. It was perched on the side of Mount Parnassus in Greece. Kings and generals, philosophers, and common people would make the long journey to Delphi to ask the god Apollo for guidance. The advice they received could start wars, found cities, and change the course of history. The process was shrouded in ritual. The questions were put to a priestess, the Pythia, who sat on a tripod over a fissure in the rock. She would enter a trance state and channel the words of the god. Her cryptic, often ambiguous pronouncements were then interpreted by priests and delivered to the petitioner. The oracle's influence was at its peak in the classical Greek period, but it continued to be important well into the Roman era. Roman emperors, including Augustus and Hadrian, consulted the oracle and showed it great respect. But by the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, its power was fading. The number of visitors dwindled. The pronouncements became rarer. The famous Greek writer Plutarch, who served as a priest at Delphi in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries AD, wrote an essay titled On the Obsolescence of Oracles. In it, he puzzles over why Delphi and other oracles had lost so much of their power. He suggests several possible reasons. Maybe the daemons that mediated between gods and humans had died or moved on. Or maybe the special vapors or pneuma that rose from the fissure in the earth, which were believed to induce the Pythia's trance, had run out. For a long time, modern scholars dismissed the idea of geological vapors as ancient superstition. But in the 1990s, a team of geologists, including Jelzilinga de Boer, studied the site. They discovered that the temple at Delphi was built directly on top of a fault line, the intersection of two geological faults. They found traces of ethylene and methane, light hydrocarbon gases with intoxicating properties, in the spring water and the travertine rock beneath the temple. Inhaling these gases in a small enclosed space could have induced a euphoric, trance-like state, causing the Pythia's visions. This geological evidence suggests that Plutarch might have been right. It's possible that seismic activity in the region altered the fault line, cutting off or reducing the flow of these gases. The oracle fell silent because the gas was literally turned off. But the geological explanation is probably only part of the story. The decline of the oracle also coincided with huge social and religious changes in the Roman Empire. The rise of new philosophical schools like Stoicism offered a different kind of guidance, one based on inner reason rather than external prophecy. More importantly, the rise of Christianity posed a direct challenge to all pagan cults. The Christian leaders saw the oracle as a fraud at best and a demonic deception at worst. They actively preached against it. The final death blow came from the Christian emperors. In 391 AD, Emperor Theodosius I, the same emperor who had to deal with the aftermath of Adrianople, issued a series of decrees that effectively outlawed all pagan worship. He ordered the closure of temples and forbade sacrifices. The oracle at Delphi was officially shut down. The last recorded response from the oracle was given to the Emperor Julian the Apostate around 362 AD. Julian was trying to revive paganism. He sent a messenger to Delphi to ask for guidance. The Pythia's reply was a sad, beautiful poem of defeat. Tell the king, the fair wrought hall has fallen to the ground. Phoebus Apollo has no longer his house, nor his mantic bay, nor his prophetic spring the water of speech is quenched. It was the oracle's own obituary. So, what was the ultimate cause of the oracle's demise? Was it a geological accident, a slow petering out of the sacred gases? Or was it a victim of a changing world, a religious and intellectual revolution that made it irrelevant? The two explanations are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps a fading geological phenomenon was misinterpreted as the god slowly abandoning his sanctuary, which in turn weakened people's faith and made them more open to new religions like Christianity. The physical and the spiritual decline may have fed each other. Why did the ancient world's most enduring religious institution lose its power? Was it a change in the earth beneath the temple or a change in the hearts and minds of the people? How much of the oracle's power was based on genuine religious faith, and how much on the political shrewdness of its priests who interpreted the ambiguous prophecies? And if the intoxicating gases were real, what was it actually like to be the Pythia, to sit on that tripod and believe you were speaking with the voice of a god? Number 7. What caused the Great Conspiracy in Roman Britain? In the year 367 AD, the province of Roman Britain was hit by a catastrophe. It was a coordinated, multi-pronged attack that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, our only major source for the event, calls it the Barbarica Conspiratio, the barbarian conspiracy. It was a military and intelligence failure on a massive scale. The province was overrun. The two highest-ranking Roman military commanders in Britain were killed. Nectaretus, the Count of the Maritime Tract in charge of coastal defense, was killed. And Philophods, the Dux Britanniarum, the Duke of Britain, in charge of the northern frontier, was ambushed and killed. The province descended into chaos. According to Ammianus, the attacks came from 3 directions. The Picts came from the north modern Scotland, the Scots came from the west from Ireland, and the Saxons and Franks, Germanic sea raiders, attacked the southeastern coast, the area known as the Saxon Shore. What made this so devastating was the apparent coordination. It wasn't just a series of random, opportunistic raids. It was a plan. The timing suggests they were working together. To make matters worse, there was a mutiny within the Roman army in Britain. A unit of native troops stationed on Hadrian's Wall, the Arani, who were supposed to act as spies and scouts, either turned traitor and joined the invaders, or were simply overwhelmed. The Roman high command was suddenly blind and leaderless. The result was mayhem. Ammianus writes that the invaders roamed far and wide, plundering and laying waste. Bands of deserters and escaped slaves joined in the looting. For 2 years, central Roman authority in Britain effectively collapsed. The situation was so serious that the Emperor Valentinian I, based in Gaul, dispatched his best general, Count Theodosius, the father of the future Emperor Theodosius I, with an elite force to restore order. Theodosius landed in 368 and spent the next year fighting a difficult guerrilla war, hunting down the scattered bands of raiders, offering amnesties to deserters, and rebuilding the shattered defenses of the province. He was successful, but the province was deeply shaken. The great mystery of the Great Conspiracy is the conspiracy part itself. How did these disparate groups, separated by geography and with a history of fighting each other, manage to coordinate such a complex attack? The Picts were a confederation of tribes in northern Scotland. The Scots were sea raiders from Ireland. The Saxons were from northern Germany. How did they communicate and plan? Did they have a unified leadership? Or was Ammianus, writing from a distance, imposing a pattern on what was really just a series of simultaneous but independent attacks that took advantage of a moment of Roman weakness? Some historians suggest the conspiracy might not have been purely barbarian. There might have been a Roman element. The period was rife with political instability and military usurpations. It's possible that a Roman usurper, someone trying to seize power in Britain, deliberately encouraged the barbarian attacks to create chaos and undermine the legitimate emperor's authority. The mutiny of the Ariani could be a sign of this internal rot. Another theory is that the conspiracy was a response to shifts in Roman policy. Perhaps a change in the payment of subsidies to frontier tribes caused them all to revolt at the same time. Archaeology provides some tantalizing but inconclusive evidence. Hordes of Roman coins buried around this time suggest widespread panic. The destruction layers at some Roman forts and towns can be dated to this period. But there is no smoking gun that proves a grand, coordinated plan. The event remains a puzzle, a sudden and violent rupture in the history of Roman Britain. It exposed the fragility of Roman control at the very edges of the empire and foreshadowed the final collapse that would come just a few decades later. So, was this a brilliant coordinated military plan by disparate barbarian tribes? Or was it just a perfect storm of bad luck for the Romans, with multiple unrelated crises hitting all at once? Was there a Roman traitor involved using the barbarians as pawns in a political power play? And how did the experience of this collapse of order affect the mindset of the Romano-British people, just one generation before Rome would abandon them for good? Number 6. Did Caligula really order his troops to collect seashells? Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, better known by his childhood nickname Caligula Little Boot, was the third Roman emperor. He ruled for just under 4 years, from 37 to 41 AD. In that short time, he earned a reputation as one of the most insane, cruel, and depraved tyrants in history. The stories about him are legendary. He supposedly had incestuous relationships with his sisters, turned the palace into a brothel, and famously tried to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul. But perhaps the most bizarre story of all is his invasion of Britain. The story comes from the Roman historian Suetonius in his book, The 12 Caesars. In 40 AD, Caligula marched the Roman legions to the northern coast of Gaul, to the shores of the English Channel. He drew them up in battle formation, complete with artillery facing the sea. Everyone expected him to give the order to launch the invasion of Britain. But then, according to Suetonius, he ordered his soldiers to put down their weapons. He told them to collect seashells. He called the shells the spoils of the ocean due to the capital and the Palatine. He filled his helmet with them. He then declared a great victory, rewarded his soldiers, and ordered a lighthouse to be built to commemorate it. He then marched back to Rome to celebrate a triumph over the sea itself. This story is so strange that historians have been trying to make sense of it for 2,000 years. What was going on? Was this definitive proof that Caligula was clinically insane? Was he so detached from reality that he thought he could literally conquer the god Neptune by stealing his seashells? This has been the traditional interpretation for centuries. The story is used as the ultimate example of his madness. But some modern historians have offered alternative theories. Maybe Suetonius, who was writing 80 years after the event and was part of a literary tradition that loved to portray bad emperors as monsters of insanity, was exaggerating or misunderstanding the event. One theory is that the whole thing was a form of punishment and humiliation for the legions. There had been a conspiracy against Caligula among some of his senior officers earlier in the campaign. The planned invasion of Britain had to be called off. Ordering his highly trained soldiers to do the demeaning, childish task of collecting shells could have been his way of mocking them for their disloyalty. It was a piece of bizarre theatrical discipline. Another possibility is a translation error. The Latin word for shells is musculi, but musculi was also a slang term used by soldiers for the small huts or tents they lived in, or for a type of engineering shed. It's possible that Caligula ordered his soldiers to collect the huts, meaning to dismantle the camp in preparation for a return to Rome, and the story got twisted over time into the more sensational seashells version. A third theory, proposed by scholars like David Woods, is that Caligula was engaging in a symbolic act. The shells, particularly a type of seashell that produced a valuable purple dye, were symbols of wealth and power. By collecting them, he might have been symbolically claiming the riches of the sea and of the unconquered island of Britain. It was a religious or propagandistic gesture, not a military one. It was street theater on a grand scale, designed to show his absolute power over both men and nature. It was an act of a sane, if deeply arrogant and unconventional autocrat. We will likely never know for sure. The other main historian of the period, Cassius Dio, also tells the story, but his work survives only in a later summary. The archaeological evidence is non-existent. We are left with Suetonius's strange, unforgettable image, the most powerful man in the world, standing on a beach with his legions, declaring victory over the waves and collecting seashells as his loot. Was Caligula a madman who thought he was fighting the sea, God? Was he a shrewd but cruel leader, punishing his troops in a deeply humiliating way? Or was it all a misunderstanding, a slang term that was taken literally by later historians? What really happened on that beach in northern Gaul, and how much of our image of the mad emperors is historical fact, and how much is the product of hostile propaganda that we can no longer see through. Number 5. Why did the silphium plant go extinct? In the ancient Roman world, there was a plant so valuable that it was worth its weight in silver. It was called silphium. It grew only in a narrow coastal strip about 125 miles long in the Roman province of Cyrenaica in modern-day Libya. This plant was a miracle. It was a universal panacea. Its stalk could be cooked as a vegetable. Its roots could be eaten fresh. It produced a resin called laser piscium that was used as a perfume and, most importantly, as a medicine. It was used to treat everything from coughs and fevers to warts and indigestion. But its most famous use was as a contraceptive and an abortifacient. It seems to have been a highly effective form of birth control. The Roman poet Catullus and the physician Soranus both mention it. The demand for silphium was immense. The economy of the Greek city of Cyrene, which controlled the trade, was built entirely on this plant. Their coins were stamped with an image of the silphium plant. The Romans loved it. Julius Caesar is said to have stockpiled 1,500 pounds of it in the Roman treasury. It's a status symbol, a wonder drug, and a culinary delight. The Roman cookbook of Apicius is full of recipes that use silphium. And then it vanished. The last stalk of silphium was supposedly harvested during the reign of the Emperor Nero in the mid-1st century AD. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder records that this last stalk was presented to the emperor as a curiosity. After that, nothing. A plant that had been a cornerstone of Mediterranean trade and medicine for centuries was gone forever. How could a plant that valuable just disappear? Pliny blames over-harvesting and over-grazing. The shepherds let their flocks graze on the plant, which supposedly made their meat taste delicious, but also destroyed the plants. The demand for the resin was so high that the government of Cyrene had to regulate the harvest. But it seems these regulations failed. People, driven by profit, simply picked the plant to extinction. It's a classic story of human greed destroying a natural resource, a sort of ancient ecological disaster. But some scholars wonder if that's the whole story. The people of Cyrene knew how valuable the plant was. They had managed the harvest for centuries. Why would they suddenly become so reckless? One theory is that they couldn't cultivate it. All attempts to grow silphium outside its narrow native habitat failed. It seems to have been a wild plant that resisted domestication. This made the wild stalks incredibly precious and vulnerable. Another possibility is climate change. The region of North Africa was becoming drier during this period, a process known as desertification. A change in rainfall patterns could have destroyed the plant's delicate habitat, making it impossible for it to reproduce. The overharvesting might have been the final blow to a species that was already struggling to survive in a changing environment. For centuries, no one was even sure what silphium looked like, other than the stylized images on Cyrenian coins. But recently, a professor at Istanbul University, Mahmut Miski, has claimed to have rediscovered a plant that could be silphium. The plant, Ferula druidiana, grows in a small area of Turkey, on a mountain that has a similar climate to ancient Cyrene. It has the same thick, branching roots and yellow flowers depicted on the coins. It produces a resin with powerful medicinal properties, and intriguingly, local animals are known to be obsessed with eating it. Genetic testing has not yet confirmed a link to any ancient samples, but it's a tantalizing possibility. The extinction of silphium had a real impact. It forced people to seek out less effective or more dangerous alternatives for medicine and contraception. A huge body of folk knowledge was lost. It serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of ecosystems and the danger of relying on a single, non-renewable resource. Why did the ancient Cyrenians who depended on this plant for their entire economy allow it to be destroyed? Was it pure, short-sighted greed, or were they helpless in the face of a changing climate? Could the plant have been saved if they had understood how to cultivate it? And is it possible that a direct descendant of this ancient wonder plant is still growing on a remote Turkish mountainside, waiting to be rediscovered? Number 4, How did they make the Lycurgus cup? In the British Museum in London, there is a small, ornate Roman glass cup. It's called the Lycurgus cup. It dates to the 4th century AD. Under normal, reflected light, it looks a murky, opaque green. But when you shine a light through it from behind, it glows a brilliant, translucent ruby red. It's a magical transformation. For a long time, no one knew how the Roman glassmakers achieved this effect. The cup was a complete anomaly, a piece of technology that seemed impossible for its time. The cup depicts a mythological scene of King Lycurgus of Thrace being trapped in a tangle of grapevines, a punishment for insulting the god Dionysus. The craftsmanship is exquisite, but the real miracle is the glass itself. It's a type of glass we now call dichroic, meaning it shows different colors depending on whether light is reflected off it or passes through it. The secret to this effect was finally revealed in the 1990s when researchers examined a tiny fragment of the cup under a powerful electron microscope. What they found was astonishing. The Roman artisans had somehow managed to impregnate the glass with nanoparticles of gold and silver. These particles are incredibly small, only about 50 nanometers in diameter. That's 1,000th the size of a grain of salt. When light hits these nanoparticles, the electrons in the metal atoms vibrate in a way that scatters certain colors of light. The silver nanoparticles are primarily responsible for scattering the greenish light, which is what we see in reflection. The gold nanoparticles are responsible for absorbing certain wavelengths, which allows the reddish light to pass through. The Romans had, without knowing the term, created a sophisticated piece of nanotechnology. This discovery raises a profound question. How did they do it? Creating nanoparticles of a specific size and mixing them into molten glass is a complex process. Modern scientists need advanced equipment and a deep understanding of physics and chemistry to do this. Did the Roman glassmakers have a scientific understanding of what they were doing? It seems highly unlikely. They had no concept of atoms or nanoparticles. The most probable explanation is that it was a result of a happy accident combined with centuries of trial and error. The glassmakers may have known that adding a tiny amount of a finely ground powder containing both gold and silver, perhaps from a mixed metal alloy like electrum to the molten glass, produced this strange, beautiful effect. They wouldn't have known why it worked, only that it did. The recipe would have been an incredibly valuable trade secret passed down through a single workshop or family. The Lycurgus cup is one of only a handful of surviving pieces of Roman dichroic glass. This suggests the technique was extremely rare and difficult to master. It was likely incredibly expensive to produce. The cup itself was probably a ceremonial object intended to be used at lavish banquets where its magical color-changing properties could be shown off by candlelight. It was the ultimate luxury good, a testament to both the artistic skill and the mysterious technical genius of its creators. But the accidental discovery theory, while plausible, still feels incomplete. To get the effect just right, the size and density of the nanoparticles have to be very precise. How did they achieve this level of control without being able to see what they were doing? The process seems too controlled to be pure luck. It hints at a level of empirical knowledge, a mastery of materials, that we have only recently come to appreciate. The technology was so advanced and so rare that when the workshop that made it disappeared, the secret was lost for over 1,500 years. Was the creation of the Lycurgus cup a 1 in a million lucky accident, or did a small group of Roman artisans possess a secret, empirical understanding of nanotechnology that was lost to history? Are there other examples of this lost art waiting to be found? And what other magical objects from the ancient world might be explained by a scientific knowledge that we have arrogantly assumed they could not possess? Number 3. What was the secret of the Eleusinian mysteries? For almost 2,000 years, from the Greek Bronze Age right through to the end of the Roman Empire, one of the most important and secret religious rituals in the ancient world took place every year at the sanctuary of Eleusis near Athens. These were the Eleusinian mysteries. They were initiation ceremonies for the cult of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. The central myth was the story of Persephone's abduction by Hades, the god of the underworld. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, searches for her lost daughter, and in her grief, the earth becomes barren. Finally, a deal is struck. Persephone will spend part of the year in the underworld and part of the year on Earth. This myth explained the cycle of the seasons, the death and rebirth of the crops. The mysteries were based on this story. They promised initiates a special connection with the goddesses, a hope for a better afterlife, and a vision that would change their lives. The list of famous people who were initiated is a who's who of the ancient world: Plato, Aristotle, and the Roman emperors, Augustus, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. To be an initiate was a mark of high culture and piety. The power of the experience was, by all accounts, profound. The Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero wrote, "We have learned from them the beginnings of life, and have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with a better hope." But there was a catch. The central part of the ritual, the things that were said and done in the great hall of initiation, the telesterion, were a complete secret. Revealing the secret of the mysteries was a capital crime, punishable by death. And this vow of silence was kept with incredible success. For 2,000 years, tens of thousands of people were initiated. And not one of them wrote down what actually happened. We have hints and fragments. We know the initiation involved a period of fasting and a long procession from Athens to Eleusis. We know that once inside the telesterion, the initiates witnessed things enacted dromena, things shown deiknimena, and things said legomena. There was a sacred story, a display of sacred objects, and some kind of powerful vision, often involving dramatic shifts between darkness and light. But the specifics are a total blank. This has led to a great deal of speculation. What could have been so powerful that it kept people silent for 2 millennia? One of the most intriguing and controversial theories is the psychedelic theory, most famously proposed by the classicist Karl Ruck, the chemist Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD, and the banker R. Gordon Wasson. They argue that the climax of the mysteries involved drinking a sacred potion called the kykeon. We know from the Homeric hymn to Demeter that the kykeon contained barley, water, and mint. The psychedelic theory suggests that the barley used was infected with a fungus called ergot. Ergot contains psychoactive alkaloids that are chemically similar to LSD. Consuming a carefully prepared dose of ergot-infected barley could have induced powerful hallucinations and a profound mystical experience. This would explain a lot. It would explain the life-changing power of the vision the initiates experienced. It would explain the need for secrecy. The ritual would have been dangerous if not properly controlled by the priests. It provides a concrete physical explanation for the spiritual transformation that so many people reported. Its critics of the theory point out that there is no direct proof. No ancient text explicitly says the kykeon was hallucinogenic. Preparing a safe and effective dose from ergot would be tricky. Too much is a deadly poison. But the circumstantial evidence is strong. The end of the mysteries came in 392 AD, when the Christian emperor Theodosius closed the sanctuary as part of his persecution of paganism. A few years later, in 396, the Goths under Alaric swept through Greece and destroyed the ancient site. The priests were killed, the temples were sacked, and the secret, whatever it was lost forever. What was the ultimate vision shown to the initiates at Eleusis? Was the secret a profound philosophical truth, a brilliant piece of religious theater, or a chemically induced psychedelic experience? If it was a psychedelic substance, how did the priests control the dosage to ensure a spiritual revelation rather than a medical emergency? And what does it say about the human search for meaning that one of the West's longest and most revered religious traditions may have been based on a secret knowledge of hallucinogenic drugs? Number 2. Why did the Romans build the dodecahedrons? Scattered across the northern provinces of the Roman Empire from Wales to Hungary, archaeologists have found over 100 strange and beautiful objects. They are called Roman dodecahedrons. They are small, hollow objects made of bronze or, more rarely, stone. They have 12 flat pentagonal faces. Each face has a circular hole in the center, and the holes are all of different sizes. There are also small knobs, or studs, at each corner of the pentagons. They range in size from about 4 to 11 centimeters. They date from the 2nd to the 4th centuries AD, and nobody has any idea what they were used for. This is one of the great unsolved puzzles of Roman archaeology. The most frustrating part is that there is absolutely no mention of these objects in any surviving Roman text or image. They seem to have been common enough to be found in military camps, public bathhouses, and private homes. Yet no one ever thought to write down what they were. This total silence is baffling. The lack of any written evidence has led to a flood of theories, ranging from the plausible to the bizarre. Perhaps they were a weapon, a kind of mace head. Unlikely, they are too small and light to be effective weapons. Many show no signs of damage. Were they candlesticks? Some have been found with traces of wax inside, but the design seems overly complex for a simple candle holder. Were they a toy, a kind of game piece? It's possible, but again, the craftsmanship seems too elaborate for a simple toy. A more complex theory is that they were a measuring device, a rangefinder for Roman artillery. The idea is that an artillery officer could look through the different sized holes to estimate the distance to a target of a known size, like a wall or a person. But experiments to test this have not been very successful. The results are not accurate, and a simpler device would have worked better. Another theory is that it was a tool for agriculture, a sort of gauge to determine the best time to sow winter grain by observing the angle of the sunlight through the holes. Perhaps the most popular and intriguing theory is that they were a religious or cult object. Their distribution is concentrated in the Gallo-Roman and Germanic provinces, areas with a strong Celtic cultural background. It's possible they were part of a local, non-Roman religion that was practiced within the empire. They could have been used for fortune-telling or scrying. The priest or seer would roll the dodecahedron like a die and interpret the result. This would explain the lack of any written description, as the rituals of many local cults were often secret. A related idea is that they were a tool for knitting, specifically for knitting the fingers of gloves. The knobs could be used to hold the yarn, and the different sized holes could correspond to different finger sizes. This is a clever theory, and some modern knitters have successfully used replicas to make gloves. But it doesn't explain why they are made of expensive bronze and not a cheaper material like wood. And why are none found in the warmer parts of the empire, like Italy or Egypt, where people also wore gloves? So we have an object with no name and no known purpose. It is a perfect mystery. It is beautifully made, mathematically precise, and utterly useless as far as we can tell. Every theory has a flaw. The dodecahedron sits on museum shelves and stares back at us, a silent testament to a piece of the Roman world that has been completely and utterly lost. What was the real function of these intricate and enigmatic objects? Like, were they a tool, a toy, or a sacred object from a lost religion? Why are they only found in the northern provinces of the empire? And why did the Romans, who wrote down everything, never once mention these strange 12-sided cages? Number 1, what happened to the 9th Legion? Legio, the 9th Hispana, the 9th Legion, the Spanish Legion. It was one of the oldest and most distinguished legions in the Roman army. It fought with Julius Caesar in Gaul. It helped Claudius conquer Britain in 43 AD. It was a symbol of Roman power and resilience. And then, sometime after the year 108 AD, it disappears from the historical record. A unit of over 5,000 elite, heavily armed soldiers vanished. The story of what happened to them has become one of the most enduring legends of the Roman Empire. The traditional story, the one that has inspired novels and films, is that the 9th Legion marched north from its base in Ebericum, York, to put down a rebellion by the tribes of Caledonia, Scotland. They marched into the midst of the Scottish Highlands and were never seen again. They were ambushed and wiped out to the last man. This theory was first proposed by the 19th century historian Theodore Mommsen. It seemed to fit the evidence. The last definite record of the Legion in Britain is from 108 AD, an inscription on a rebuilt gateway in York. A few decades later, the Emperor Hadrian built his famous wall across the north of England. The wall was seen as a defensive measure, a sign that the Romans had suffered a major military catastrophe in the north and were now giving up on conquering Scotland. The disappearance of an entire legion would certainly qualify as such a catastrophe. This story of a lost legion in Scotland is incredibly romantic and powerful. But in recent decades, most historians and archaeologists have come to believe it's a myth. The evidence for it is very thin. There has been no archaeological discovery in Scotland, no mass grave, no battlefield that can be linked to the destruction of the Ninth. As scholars like Dr. Miles Russell have pointed out, the argument from silence is not very strong. A new theory has emerged based on fragmentary pieces of evidence from other parts of the empire. Inscriptions have been found in Nijmegen in the Netherlands that show some soldiers from the 9th were stationed there around 120 AD. This means the legion, or at least a detachment of it, was transferred out of Britain. Other evidence, like tile stamps, suggests the legion was moved to the eastern part of the empire. The most likely scenario is that the 9th was sent to fight in one of the brutal wars on the frontiers of Judea or Parthia, modern-day Iran. Two major conflicts fit the timeline: the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea, 132 to 136 AD, or a war in Cappadocia against the Parthians around 161 AD. The Roman historian Cassius Dio mentions that a Roman legion was destroyed in the Parthian War. Could this have been the Ninth? If this theory is correct, the Ninth Legion wasn't lost in the Scottish mists. It was transferred from a cold, wet island on the edge of the world to a hot, dry war zone in the Middle East, where it met its end in a forgotten battle. This is a less romantic story, but it is more consistent with how the Roman army operated. The legions were moved around the empire constantly to deal with new threats, but this new theory is not without its own problems. The evidence is still patchy and circumstantial. The inscriptions from Nijmegen could refer to a small detachment, not the entire legion. The identity of the legion destroyed in the East is not specified. We still don't have a definitive record of the legion's fate. The silence in the historical record after 108 AD is real. The legion was gone. Something happened to it, we just don't know what, where, or when. The mystery remains. Where did 5,000 Roman soldiers go? Were they annihilated in the highlands of Scotland, a story that has captivated us for centuries? Or did they meet their end thousands of miles away, in the deserts of the Middle East, fighting a different enemy? Why is there no definitive record of the fate of one of Rome's most famous legions? Did the Roman state deliberately cover up a particularly humiliating defeat? Or is this just a case of a missing file in the vast and often incomplete archives of history? The ghost of the Ninth Legion continues to march through the shadows of the Roman Empire.